Former U.S. Attorney for the state of Georgia, Michael J. Moore. He was appointed by President Obama for Central Georgia. He served as a key part in our Georgia coverage here, and today has insights on the questions around elector and voter fraud and all of that plotting. So we're happy to have him as a guest, an expert and an independent journalist, Washington Post reporter Libby Casey, with a view on what it all means even beyond the law. Welcome to both of you. We just walked through some of that really fascinating and pretty damning information that showed that as Pence was walking in to the proceeding that day, and we have that footage right around the same time, within the same half hour, Senator Johnson was still, through an aide, pushing to try to ambush him with some sort of what would appear to be a fraudulent document for the purposes, Michael, of submitting that fraudulent document for a government proceeding regarding an election. I'm speaking this way deliberately because Mr. Johnson has the freedom to lie in public. He even has the freedom to lie on the Senate floor if he chooses. But when you start submitting false documents to the government, you tend to cross a legal line. Your analysis.
Well, I'm glad to be with you both. And clearly, Senator Johnson is one to invoke his freedoms, as we've seen from his public statements over the last year or so. I think anytime that you create a document, that you try to submit a forged document or a fraudulent document, especially in furtherance of a conspiracy to undermine a federal election, you've got problems. And that's essentially where we are. And so whether we talk about it from the state investigations that may occur, or whether we look at it from maybe a larger DOJ investigation that may very well be underway, we just don't know, given sort of the secrecy that surrounds the efforts by the Attorney General of the United States in these types of cases and investigations. I think it's going to come into play. And these texts, these real-time messages are damning. If you think about it on a much more basic level, what you think about sort of a drug transaction, and you've got somebody controlling the drug distribution enterprise, and the prosecutor gets his hands on these messages between the drug runners that says, hey, so-and-so told me to bring X amount of dope to such and such an address, or whatever it is. That's really what you have here, is that type of information. You've got real-time statements by people who were involved, and it also obviously leads you to other witnesses, some of them being obviously members of the vice president's staff.
Yeah, no, I mean, you lay it out there. And before I bring in Libby, just staying with you on the law, Washington Post coverage of this about the direction of fraudulent electors plots in Georgia, quote, your duties are imperative to ensure the end result, they wrote, a win for Georgia for President Trump. They'll be hampered unless we have, quote, complete secrecy and discretion. That's from a Trump campaign staffer in Georgia. At what point, from what you heard today, Michael, does that move beyond vigorously contesting an election, which I have been careful to remind people is allowed,
sure,
and saying the thing is over, you lost, and now again you're trying to go into a proceeding, be it a electoral proceeding, a congressional legislative proceeding, a court proceeding. I think people are familiar with perjury. You want to lie in front of the court? Not a great idea, but that's different. You go walk through the doors and suddenly it's perjury. Do you see a case here against anyone involved in the elector plot as committing a crime, or do you not have enough evidence now?
I don't know if we've got enough evidence yet. I think it could be forthcoming. The secrecy aspect is something that's telling, because that usually goes to somebody's motive or their intent, maybe what their criminal intentions were if they're moving forward. And again, you see that in most of these types of transactions in criminal cases. Somebody says, be quiet. Guess what gets them caught? It's because people can't keep their mouths shut. So the secrecy just adds a little bit of sexiness maybe to the facts of the case. It doesn't make it in and of itself a criminal violation for them to remain quiet. It's the steps, it's the substantial steps, the overt acts that may have been taken to further a conspiracy here to commit election fraud that may cause the biggest problem for the people who were involved in the fraudulent elector scheme. And you're right. There's a legitimate way to challenge an election if you want to do it. They tried numerous court cases around the country to do that. They had their day in court, and typically the Republican Party has been sort of the party of the rule of law. Unfortunately, here, where the rule of law was against them, they decided that the rules didn't matter in large part, and tried to sort of concoct a scheme to use fake documents and fake electors as if somehow that would legitimize the efforts that may have been pushed out from the campaign. So this is part of a story. It's not the end of the story. And I think we're getting further into it. So I think it's an important building block. But if you're asking me to build a house, I'm saying that we're down near the foundation, and we're going to keep working as we get a little further up to complete the structure, if that's in fact the criminal case.
Understood, and appreciate your precision there. That's the law. Libby, the wider story the Congress is telling today. It has legal elements. We heard Republicans worried that Trump was breaking the law and when they tapped out. But it also was a story today to the country that really brought this back to the states. I mean, there's a reason why we have it cut up this way. The founders created federalism, yada, yada. But there's also the fact that we're not in D.C. anymore today. We weren't talking only about all this the mumbo jumbo in the Beltway. It was really hearing from people around the country. I'm curious what you thought about the efficacy of that today.
Yeah, well, so we see this moment in these texts where the aide for Senator Johnson's trying to get the vice president to take this slate of fake electors from Michigan and Wisconsin. But what the committee showed today was it was part of a broader attempt to get fake electors certified. They sent them to they sent documents to the National Archives, and the committee showed these are the real ones, these are the fake ones. And as you talked about earlier in your show, Ari, it seems a little half-baked in bits and pieces, but when you look at the big scope of this, and when you see that it was this concerted effort that the Trump campaign was doing, targeting officials in each of these states where they thought they could find sympathetic ears and overturn the election, this gets at this question that the committee's probing of who is ultimately responsible for a broader plot to overthrow a rightful election. And we saw the end results of that when we saw how impactful it was on regular Americans, patriotic Americans' lives, whether they were civil servants working an election with their mom or whether they were officials trying to, oversee how an election is run in a state like Georgia. Rusty Bowers, who's the very conservative Republican Speaker of Arizona's state house, said he was pressured and told, just do it, let the courts sort it out. And imagine, Ari, if these people had just done it and then waited to see where the chips would fall with a legal process, how much more convoluted and confusing and enraging it could have been for some Trump supporters, for example, who might have said, look, they're doing it. It's got to be legitimate and legal.
And to your point, Libby, the courts are settling, are sorting it out. There's a bunch of people who've been indicted. There are some people who've been convicted. The QAnon shaman is doing 40 months. The courts are sorting it out, but it's never a great sign if your campaign strategy has turned into trying to recruit people to actively break the law. I want you to.
What if, Ari, they had overthrown the election and then let the court sort it out? How many more people believed that this was actually an illegal election? It's just frightening to think about how much more it could have fractured the American public as people tried to understand what was going on. Yeah,
and you make an important point, Libby, which again goes to how the public understands this. You called it half-baked, right? And that's...
Well, I mean, if I was writing a plot, I don't think Hollywood would buy it, because when you see some of the characters and what they're doing, it seems unreal. But when you look at it in retrospect, as the committee lays out, point 1, point 2, point 3, what we're looking at is an arc, and it's telling a story. And the question is, can the committee show responsible parties like Donald Trump, like
so when Giuliani? You go, and so when you take it together, you say, okay, it was half-baked and it wasn't completed, but the country understanding how close they were, what held the line, what they really wanted to do, because they can practice and come back. And we've talked about that and covered some of the places elections officials. I thought it was powerful that they began the hearing with an example of an indicted insurrectionist who also is on this local elections board. We covered that, but I'm not sure that as many people know about it as they do now, because they put that as the start of the hearing. So to Libby's point, Michael, I want to play as well what we learned here today about Trump directing one of the schemes on a call, asking for help. RNC Chair McDaniel testifying any action she took was at his direct request.
At the president's direct request, the RNC assisted the campaign in coordinating this effort.
What did the president say when he called you?
Essentially, he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result.
Michael, your view of the import of that, and if Donald Trump comes along and says, who's John Eastman? This guy went rogue. How much does it matter that so many people put them together acting in concert and as his agent?
Yeah, well, and again, I don't mean to be using a lot of crime analogies, but let me just ask you to think about the Godfather movie where the Godfather has a consigliere, and it's this lawyer or this advisor who the Godfather gets to do things for him and sort of be the voice of the throne, so to speak, so that there's one step removed between the Godfather and the wrongful act. That's what's happened here. That's why Trump gets his lawyer on the phone, which is a smart move if you think about it, because he'll say, well, I was pursuing legal remedies. I had my lawyer talk to him, and that's clever, if we gave him enough credit for thinking that far ahead. And so that's essentially what's happening. So it's great testimony, and it shows, in fact, that there's a real effort by Trump to be the puppet master here, moving things around. Let me say one thing about sort of the pressure on the state people, because I think this is important, and it kind of goes to my co-guest here, some comments that were made. I think we do ourselves sort of a disservice if we make too much of a martyr out of people who just did the right thing. And I think about the Secretary of State here in Georgia, and they, somehow, we want to give them the Nobel Prize or something for doing what they were supposed to do. But then we listen to them talk about, well, my family was threatened and it was terrible and I took so much pressure. Well, you can't raise a dog to fight and then complain because you get bit. And so this is just the result of sort of this ongoing effort for the last 4 years and this tolerance and this refusal of people, especially, elected officials, Republican elected officials, to speak up and call out the wrongdoing of Trump. And we saw it. We shouldn't even be talking about a criminal case. We shouldn't even be having to be at this point, because this should have been handled through impeachment.